You can say, what would this moment look like if I wasn't trying to force or push? And if I could just allow this person to be in their discomfort, could I allow this person to just experience whatever it is that they're experiencing without trying to convince them to feel different or be different?
Welcome to the Inflow Podcast. I am your host, Michelle Bosch. I see a gaping hole across society that focuses on the outer work and forgets about the inner work, when what we really need is to bridge the gap between prosperity and spirituality to live a life in flow, with inflows of light, inflows of cash, inflows of creativity, inflows of grace in our lives. Each week, join me for powerful messages and interviews that will leave you inspired and ready to step into flow in your higher work. So now, let's go. Welcome to the Inflow Podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Bosch. I have a super special guest with me today. Her name is Cynthia Kane. Welcome, Cynthia, to Inflow.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Happy.
Super excited to have you. So just for our listeners to know, I have been looking forward to this chat because Cynthia, helps both men and women, change the way they communicate. So that they feel more confident, more present, in their daily interactions. She's a mindfulness instructor. She has taught over 50,000 people how to communicate better, feel more confident. She's also author of 3 bestselling books: How to Communicate Like a Buddhist, Talk to Yourself Like a Buddhist, and How to Meditate Like a Buddhist. Her works appears in numerous publications, including the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune, Women's Day Magazine, Yoga Journal. And so I'm just, like I said, we all need more of how to have difficult conversations in a compassionate way, not just in our, personal life, in our business life, but also in how we talk to ourselves.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Cynthia. So tell us a little bit about your background. How do you become a mindfulness meditation, and how do you become a communications expert? Like what happened at some point in your upbringing that you decide, okay, this is what I'm here to, enlighten the world with?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I did not grow up, with the desire or want or knowing that I wanted to be a meditation mindfulness instructor or get into communication and teach people how to communicate. It wasn't something that was, on my list. I was a really horrible communicator. I was extremely passive aggressive, very judgmental, and very reactionary. And I had a lot of problems with silence, and I just wanted to fill the space all the time. And I really had difficulty expressing myself. So I would really think that it was someone else's responsibility to know how I was feeling and what it was that I needed, without me really being able to express what it was that I wanted and needed. A lot of that had to come down to the fact really that I didn't know what I wanted and what I needed, but I felt that someone else should know that. And I had been with my first love for about 7.5 years. We met in college. And so we really grew up together, and we decided to go our separate ways. He was from Costa Rica. So he was out in Costa Rica and I was back in the States, and I actually moved to Madrid for a little bit, but we had this idea that we would come back together. The universe would bring us back together when it was the time for us to, we'd grow apart, we'd come back and start again. And so we did come back together. We came back together 4 years later. We were both in New York, and we talked a lot about our relationship. And so much of what didn't work around our relationship was communication or miscommunication and misunderstanding, right? And so we had really vowed in that moment to be in each other's lives again. And then 4 months later, he passed away unexpectedly. And my whole world just crumbled. Everything was so empty for me.
Mm-hmm.
The world was completely a place I didn't really understand. I didn't really know. I didn't know me. I was really, almost, it was like I was just kind of floating around.
Mm-hmm.
And it was there really that I found that if I wanted to feel better, if I wanted to enjoy my time here, that it was going to have to be something that I was doing, that I was responsible for it, because everyone came out and everyone was so loving and caring and wanted to be helpful in that time, but nothing was helping. And all I wanted was somebody to just come and take all of what I was feeling away. And I wanted to just get through it and get over it and move on. And I couldn't. And that's when I realized, okay, I'm going to have to figure this out. And so I started reading all these books and taking courses and going, to lectures and doing coaching and things of that sort. And everything I was learning was really helpful. I just couldn't embody it. Nothing was actually.
It was intellectual knowledge, but not really. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. I mean, it was just all abstract, right?
Yeah.
And I really was like, how does this work? How do I make this work?
Mm-hmm.
And a friend of mine, then she introduced me to a workshop that was happening at the Shambhala Institute when I lived in New York, a meditation and writing workshop. And I didn't know much about meditation. I didn't really know much about Buddhism. But I went because I was really trying everything. And that weekend changed everything for me. It was where I learned meditation. And it was the first time that I had ever really sat with myself, allowed myself to just be with myself, not push any of myself away, but just to see everything and let it be okay, not judge it, right, as good or bad, but just it is. And that created such a shift in me just from that first weekend that it became something I was super interested in and really curious about. And then I learned the elements of right speech in Buddhism, which are tell the truth, don't exaggerate, don't gossip, and use helpful language. And I was almost at that point just so it was like the lights had just gone off, right? And they were like, okay, this is how you do it. This is actually how you embody pretty much all of what you've been learning.
Can you repeat those four again?
Yeah.
Helpful language.
Use helpful language.
Yeah.
Don't gossip.
Well, they all seem like common sense. Yes.
Don't exaggerate.
Uh-huh.
And use helpful language.
Yeah.
Or no, we did that one. So it's tell the truth.
Okay. Tell the
truth.
The one I'm missing.
Don't gossip. Don't exaggerate, and use helpful language. So when I heard those, I thought, oh my gosh, here we go. Guidelines I can follow. Okay, let's do this. Let's make this happen. So the next day I woke up and it really became kind of my lifestyle experiment of, okay, start to pay attention. How are you talking to yourself? Are you talking to in a way that's kind? Is it honest? Is it helpful? And when I started paying attention to the way that I was interacting with myself, it was really heartbreaking, because what I was finding was the way that I was talking to myself was causing more fear, more anxiety, more grief, more lack, right? And so I had to figure out how to change that.
Yeah.
How to change the relationship to that, so that I was talking to myself differently, so that then I could start communicating with others differently. And then how could I interact with the world differently? And so that's really how the process began. And I created this practice of communication called the Kane Intentional Communication Method. And it works for me in that, my relationships completely opened up. The world became such a friendlier place for me. There was so much more ease for me in expressing myself, in becoming very concise and conscious about what I was saying. The passive aggressive piece, I really learned how to feel all the sensation that was rising in my body that would push me to become passive aggressive. And instead of give over to that, I taught myself how to move it so that I could be in the present moment, access the present moment, and have helpful conversations. So then I started writing about it, and then people became interested in it. And then it started working for other people. And so this is how really this all grew. And then my books came out, and then I started, I have a daily Om course that is, a best-selling course where over 50,000 people have taken just that one course, right? How to communicate like a Buddhist. And then out of that grew this need to really work with me directly. And so now I have a training program, and then I have an instructor training program, and all of it's kind of grown from there. So this is how I've gotten to this place. It is a very, it's just a strange way to get to where I am. Though I can't really think of any other way of reaching this place, except through the path that I've taken. And that's how I got here.
Yeah. Sometimes like our biggest, losses are our biggest, teachers.
Yeah.
So what is a typical example of, the thousands of people that you have, now taught? What is the most common, you would say, and let's talk about, I don't know, if it's either a love relationship or someone that just triggers all your buttons at work, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And you exhibit, these passive aggressive tendencies that, that you describe, that you yourself, also experience, and we all do. I think it's a human experience. We all do. Mm-hmm. And so what are some of the typical examples, and then how would anyone listening to us start to even begin to distance themselves and actually even be aware that this is happening, mm-hmm. Because first, to begin with, you need to be aware that this is happening in your head, and catching it in the moment, to being able to, to be able to course correct as the conversation is flowing, or as whether it be with someone externally or with yourself. Like, what would be, some of the things that you see very common, happening in a scenario, and what would be the one thing that you could do, like basically to at least notice and be aware?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what's fascinating is every scenario that kind of provokes a reaction from someone is going to be different. Yeah. But there are specific default reactions that we normally kind of fall into, right? So someone might become passive aggressive, someone might lash out, someone might shut down and just go inward and just stop talking. Someone might walk away, right? Someone might start dodging or lying and making excuses. So the first step is really, when you think about a difficult interaction that you've had, or some type of, interaction where you have gotten passive aggressive, you've gotten quiet, you've lashed out, you have...
Sometimes we do it with the people that we love the most,
Yes. I mean, I think that's the easiest place to start in a lot of sense, because that's most of the time where we see it, right? Mm-hmm. And so...
Guilty of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to do in those places because, we feel safe there. We feel that we can go to those places there, right? Yeah. Whereas in a professional setting, you really work to kind of rein that in, or,
self-edit.
Yes, you learn to self-edit, right? Although sometimes you don't, but yes, the majority, I would say, do. And that's one thing you will notice, that in one area of your life, you may feel more confident in your communication, and then other areas, not so much. But when you think about an interaction where you've kind of defaulted into that way, right? It's really understanding that anytime you go to that place, there's a feeling or there's an emotion that is being sparked within you, whether you know it or you don't know it, right? And so the awareness piece really comes first with knowing what's happening in your body. So when you start to pay attention to the sensation of the body, if you even think back to an interaction that you had where you defaulted to one thing, right? What was happening in the body at that time, right? A lot of times their palms will sweat. It's almost like they've been like punched in the gut. Sometimes for me, it's like a tightness in the throat, a tightness in the chest, right? It's like there's just like a lot of discomfort going on within the body. And so that's the awareness that you start with first, because that's your cue really to understand that you are about to default into a way of interacting that's just not helpful, right?
Yeah.
It's not helpful for you. It's not helpful for the other person. The likelihood that the outcome that you're looking for, which in the moment you may actually not even know what that is, but the likelihood that that's happening or will happen isn't very high, right? When you go into your default reactions. So in the moment, the awareness comes with really starting to understand that sensation, to know, okay, here it is. And then you're going to talk to yourself in that moment. So oftentimes what we do in those moments is we just look outward and our focus is outward. But what we want to do instead is bring it inward.
Okay.
So you want to talk to yourself in that moment and be like, oh, okay, Cynthia, you're feeling something, a lot of discomfort in here. You're getting a little like full right now. Like things are going to start moving. I get it. You're upset right now. Let's just be here now. What's happening? What's happening with your feet? What's happening with your hands? What's happening with your belly? Let's check in with the present moment, right? So you start talking to yourself because you're in that moment. It's about soothing your anger, soothing your frustration first, and then seeing if you can breathe into it. It's kind of like moving it to the side. And then you come back to the person who's in front of you to be able to see them in a way where you want to be helpful to them. You want to be supportive of them. You want to allow them to have their reaction potentially, right? And then you're in the present moment, and then you can choose to be helpful. But in a grid acronym that I like is, in the moment where you start to feel the sensation, just use the mantra soften. Right? Soften.
Yeah.
And so that's actually the process that you're doing as well, right? When you go through each of the steps. But just saying that word.
I love that, because even just, the word soften, normally, like you said, for me, it's throat and tightness in the chest. And it's basically this incredible feeling of feeling constricted, because your muscles are contracted, and just saying soften and, or bringing awareness from kind of like this mental universe where this all started, you know what I mean? And bringing it into your body, makes sense.
Yeah. So even when you just say that word, you come back to your center faster, and you're like, okay, whoa, let's start this again. Like, let's interact here in a way that feels good to me, where I'm going to respect it. Right.
Yeah. And it's not, because one of the things that you said, there were 4, there's like, don't go, have your languaging be not of gossip, don't exaggerate, tell the truth, and use helpful language. And so it's not about not saying or speaking your truth. It's about making sure that you say it in a way such that the other person is actually receiving it, so that it is become helpful.
Yes.
I know how these 4 are really good ones.
Yeah. And that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And then understanding that if you're able to really come to each interaction without any judgment or blame or the sense of exaggeration, right, of better than or less than.
Yeah.
If you have something to say that may be hard for someone to hear, they're going to be able to receive it differently, because they're not hearing any blame or judgment or resentment or, criticism. It's coming out a completely different way.
Now, say somebody's listening to this, and you put down, your earbuds, and all of a sudden, somebody screams, "Mom," or whatever, "I need you for this." And immediately you're like, well, there goes, and you lash out, and well, there goes my noticing. In general, like, it takes us a little bit, to get used to even paying attention and noticing. But from your experience with students, it's something that of course takes time. But how soon, or let's say, do you start seeing already changes within a couple of hours of practicing it, a couple of days of practicing it? And when you forget about it, what do you tell yourself then? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I know that I'm super critical of myself, and I'm like, darn, I'm supposed to be doing this,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I blew it yet again. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, so in the beginning, the awareness is really just beginning to notice how you are interacting.
Yeah.
And those moments where you do overreact, right? Where you do exaggerate or you are lying, you're just starting to pay attention to it and not judge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not get down on yourself for it.
Yeah.
And the way to do that, right, is really to just be able to come out and say, hey, Michelle, you're doing okay. You've got this. We're okay. We've got this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like to come in with like that friendly voice. And
Yeah.
especially so what happens with the practice, after paying attention to your language, you will notice within, a week or so that you start to change it. Because you begin to notice how unhelpful it is
Yeah.
and how it causes more suffering. It causes more discomfort. It causes more anxiety. It causes more yelling. It causes more confusion, right?
Yeah.
And what you begin to see is how by shifting the language, you prevent a lot of those things. And so that's the beauty of it, because you really begin to see, wow, okay, this works. So I want to do more of this and I want to do less of that. But the way that the practice happens is that first you notice afterwards. So I tell to my students, first you're going to notice what is happening after you do it. And everyone's like, well, that's not great. And I'm like, but it is. Because let's say your child bursts in, you're like upset about it. You're like, why are you here? What's going on? The door was shut or whatever it is.
Uh-huh.
Right? And then you've said it and you're like, oh gosh, that wasn't very kind. That wasn't necessary, right?
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't useful. So in that moment, that's the wonderful moment, because now you're aware of it. So now you're aware that the next time that happens,
Yeah.
right, you can interact with that moment differently. But in the moment when you notice it and you're upset with yourself about it, right, that's when, again, you have to come out and you have to be like, hey, Michelle, I understand that like you just interacted in that way and you don't feel good about it. I get it. And I'm here for you. And I just want you to know that we're going to do better next time. Right. Yeah. And so like your voice comes out and soothes yourself to be able to say, you're doing it. You're doing great. Like you just had a moment. That's okay. That moment doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean you're a bad mom. It doesn't mean any of those things. It just means it happened. Right. And so that's what you start to learn. You start to learn to be able to just see it and say, oh, I did that. That's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's not something to judge. It's just something to notice. I did that. Okay. So next time, what I'm going to try to do in this moment is I'm going to pay more attention. I'm going to see the door open and maybe I'm just going to slow down and I'm going to look at my child and I'm going to actually listen to what they have to say. Right. Mm-hmm. So you start to learn from that. And that's the great piece about it, because then every time it happens, it's an opportunity for you to practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Now, Cynthia, I want to talk a little bit about the communication that we have with ourselves, which is exactly what, we've been talking about, but from the point of view or from the filter of how we talk to ourselves regarding money and finances.
Yeah.
And how whenever there is a financial decision of sorts, there's usually fear, doubt, and just in general, this feeling of uneasiness, anxiety. Sometimes it's like in the pit of your stomach, when you're about to make, either a financial decision or an investment, and so how to deal with doubt or fear, in those moments as we talk to ourselves, like how can we dissolve those? Because I do know that most, successful entrepreneurs or, anyone that has achieve something regarding finances are usually people that are so okay with being in short periods of discomfort, because they know that it's temporary, and that at the other end they will emerge, much stronger based on prior experiences that they make. I always ask, women that are successful, how often do you make difficult decisions? And they're always like, almost every day. And then, and the people that are not successful, they're not making difficult decisions every single day. And so, and part of it, I think, is because of what we say, to ourselves when we are about to make a decision, and it's not what is in our norm, and therefore we don't make it. You know what I mean? Especially for us ladies and women. So can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the way that we talk to ourselves really dictates how we make decisions. It dictates how we act, right? So if something comes up and we're telling ourselves that we don't have enough money for this, or that if we make this purchase, that means that for like the next month, I'm going to have to scale back on things.
Yeah.
Right? All that is doing is creating more fear and discomfort within you.
Yeah.
It is not trusting, right, yourself. And so that's really what the self-talk is about. It's in these moments when it comes to money, it's not trusting that we are capable enough of creating more wealth.
Yeah.
And so first, it's noticing the way that you're talking to yourself that is having you feel really stuck in this place of lack, right? In this place of fear.
Yeah.
And seeing in that moment if you can practice trust, right? So asking yourself, well, what would it feel like for me in this moment if I didn't have this fear, right? What would it feel like if I told myself that I did have enough money, right? What would it feel like if I shifted my attention less on like what's not happening or what may not happen, which is all exaggeration, right? Which is all false. It's not true because we don't know any of it to be true, right? So then you focus on what is true. Well, what do I know to be true right now?
Yeah.
Right? I know that this is the decision I need to make. This is what I want to have happen. This is what I want to have happen. This is what needs to happen, right? And so you kind of cut away all of that which you do not know, which you are creating in your head, and you focus more on what it is that you do know to be true.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But the other piece too is to feel that fear and to feel the discomfort.
Yeah.
What I tell students all the time is to name it, right? To close your eyes, to name all of the things that you are afraid of happening because of it. And imagine that everything that you're saying is like piling up in your hands. You're holding your fear. You're holding all of it. And then you're just like, okay, I'm just going to put this down here. I'm just going to put this fear down.
I love the image and the actual physical ritual of putting it to the side.
Yeah. And you put it down and you're like, I'm just going to give this over to something else, right? Yeah. This is just going to sit right here. And I'm going to sit and ask myself, with this no longer a part of me, can I trust, right? Because that is really the practice. Like when you are talking to yourself in a way that is making you feel more discomfort and more fear, that is really your cue to say, okay, how can I love myself more in this moment? How can I believe in myself more, right? And how can I trust more?
Yeah.
And so much of the time, we focus on what is going out. And so a wonderful way is to see if you can shift your attention to what will be coming in, right? So instead of what's going to be going out for this to happen, think of what will be coming in for this to happen.
Yes.
Right? If you do this, then what are you going to create more of because of it? And so that's another piece of this, is really shifting your attention onto that which moves you more in the direction you want to go, as opposed to that which keeps
moving
you
away
in a
from,
state,
yeah,
and
yeah,
stuck in that state of just suffering, right? That just
yeah.
goes on and on. You have to break it somehow, or else you're not going to move forward at all.
Absolutely. I always, and I actually had an episode that I recorded a week prior about being like a freedom junkie, especially in these kinds of situations and decisions. And what I mean by that is, like, I love the exhilaration of, or the adrenaline rush
Yeah.
of basically imagining how I will emerge from this decision, on the other end, and that I'm going to have mastered it, and that every time I'm being brave and I'm doing things that I'm scared of, that I'm sending this amazing wave out there into the universe that is healing not just my, poverty consciousness, but that is healing everyone else's along with it every time. And so I feel this incredible sense of responsibility. I'm like, no, I got to make this decision, because it's not just about me. It's not just about a financial legacy for my daughter, but I am really affecting the world at a much larger scale.
Yeah.
By being brave. And I'm like, yeah, my courage matters for that reason.
Oh, I
Not
love
just,
that. That's so
what I
true.
mean?
My courage matters. That's a great mantra. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if we were to bring this now, because so within, so without, or just like above, below, or below, above, in the current environment in which, for example, this country or the entire world, has been living over the last, 6 months, how can, and I know the answer is probably going to be yes, it starts with us. Mm-hmm. But how can we, on a more collective level, start employing a bit more of these 4 ways of, of talking that the Buddha, mm-hmm. someone, a very ancient, figure, wise man, had back then. And those are truths that prevail back then and prevail now as well. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. How can we start applying those in more as a collective?
So, yes, it does start with us, right? Mm-hmm. Listening to ourselves, but also, when you are in conversation with others, see if you can practice allowing people to speak, mm-hmm. right? Allowing them to share and mm-hmm. express themselves without cutting them off, without interrupting, and just seeing if you can hold space for somebody to have a different opinion than you, right?
Yeah. Which is so hard right now with the political environment. You go on social media and you're like, you feel like the urge about to interact, and you're like, is it going to make a difference? And I'm like, no, it's not going to make a difference. So I'll keep on scrolling, moving on. But the urge is there, you know what I mean? And
that's it. Like, that's it, right? It's the urge that you want to pay attention to, because that is telling you, okay, I want to do something. And then you get to come in and say, was what I'm about to say kind? Is what I'm about to say helpful? Is what I'm about to say necessary, right? Does this add to the conversation? Does this help the other person? Does this help me? Right? Yeah. And so that's really what you want to focus on, is to just understand that you are very powerful, because you have the ability to speak. You have the ability to use words and express yourself, and you get to choose those words, and they affect not only you, but they affect other people, mm-hmm. right? And so I think right now it's just really important to commit to, being purposeful with your language, and saying to yourself before you have conversations, or before a meeting, or before you're going to, socially distance with people, or however it is, but for you beforehand to say, okay, my intention right now is to really stay open through this conversation. My intention is to only speak if I have something that is going to be really helpful. My intention is to, pay attention to the sensations coming in my body and deciding, is this helpful for me to give into it or not? And so it becomes a very different way of looking at communication. There's a purpose to communication, right? And in this context, the purpose is to help yourself and someone else suffer less. So if you're going in with that idea, it will change the way that you're showing up.
Yeah. Another thing that I think has been incredibly helpful is not just following, these four, but at least it's been helpful to me, especially in business, to, something bad happens or you have a problem, there's always something going on. If you're an entrepreneur, some crisis that you need to put off, a fire that needs to be put off. And I remember at the beginning, I was like, oh my God, we are so screwed, And now, the last several years, I have changed that to say, oh my goodness, this is so inconvenient.
Mm-hmm. It makes a big difference, doesn't it?
And just the word that is being used, I am describing it still. I might not be, still yet. Is it telling the truth or is it, being helpful? But I'm just, at least I've started with like changing a little bit, the word, so that again, it softens the situation. So,
there's
that
not
I don't know if that is
judgment.
something that you do as well, but I have found it incredibly helpful. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that if you're in a situation where the lion escaped, it may be appropriate to use the other one, but
yeah.
We're rarely in those situations anyways.
Yeah.
Now what are you, Cynthia, what are you excited about right now? What is coming up for you? What are you looking forward right now in the future in terms of bringing much more of this and into the world and helping others really enjoy the journey? We're here for not very long. It seems like 80, 90 plus years or however long we live, like it's a long time, but in the scope of times, and how can we, make the most of it? And so what are you excited about? What do you see shifts happening right now in terms of like on a global scale, in terms of like how we communicate, or where do you see that, we could be doing more all in general as a society?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think right now is such an incredible time for communication. There's opportunity, right? There's an opportunity to change the conversation that's been happening in the US. There's an opportunity to, interact differently right now. And I think that there are a lot of people who are seeing the need for it, at least right now. That's starting to really show itself, that there is a need for something to change when it comes to, discussion and not necessarily agreeing, but, starting to really question and ask ourselves, how can we have difficult conversations? How can we be in the presence of others who we really don't agree with and still honor and respect them, right? How can we understand that we can have a discussion without trying to force someone to see the way that we see, or without trying to convince somebody that it should be this way and that this is the right way and this is the wrong way, when truly we don't know what is right. We don't know what is wrong. We just know that it is, right? And so I think that that's what is exciting for me, I guess, about right now, is that I think that people are starting to ask questions that are going to lead more to a consciousness around language, right? Around how people are interacting. And also what I'm finding is seeing that people are starting to understand that it does begin with them, right? And that what I love is that one person can change a conversation, right? I say this to my students all the time, because they'll ask before the training, well, if my husband's not doing this, or if, my colleagues aren't doing this, are things really going to change? And things do change, because
we're responding to their interactions and situations, that is going to make the whole difference,
Yeah. And they can't interact with you in the same way because you are interacting differently.
Completely different. Yeah.
Right. And so, and the only way for things to change is to do something different. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about that. And also I'm really excited because right now for, my work personally, I'm starting now to have, those in my instructor training program are starting to, leave the instructor training program. And so that's phenomenal because that means that it's not only me running the trainings anymore and that there will be more people running the trainings. So it's more accessible.
Amplified your message, through multiply yourself through all of these now,
Yes.
instructors that are going out there and bringing your message. Of course. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's really exciting for me so that it's more accessible and there's more opportunities and options. And then I can do more to share the practice, and then people can learn it. And
yeah, absolutely. Now, if somebody listening to this wanted to learn, and wanted to improve in their communication, where could they go to learn more about what you do, your work, and just about who Cynthia is?
Yeah. So they can go to cynthiakane.com.
Okay.
And there, you'll learn more about my books, How to Communicate Like a Buddhist, Talk to Yourself Like a Buddhist, and How to Meditate Like a Buddhist. And in terms of, kind of starting in with the practice, there's the books, obviously, and then there are the daily Om courses that I have that are How to Communicate Like a Buddhist and Turn Off the Enemy in Your Mind. And that's really about how we talk to ourselves. And these are audio courses. I'm not involved. It's not working with me directly. But then, for those who are really interested in taking this to the level of really embodying it and being able to become less reactive and not be led by the emotion, right? And really have, easy, relaxed interactions and know how to navigate difficult conversations, right? Then working with me directly in the intentional communication training program is a phenomenal way. It's 14 weeks that we get to spend together, and you can apply on my website. It's there. You can apply.
Awesome. I love that you said that you have a daily Om audio or some kind of a practice for the day, or
so Daily Om is a platform that does a lot of wellness courses and things of that sort. And the way that this course is set up is that there's audio, but then there's daily action. And so it's really helpful.
Yeah, awesome.
For implementing. Because that's the most important piece for me, is for people, like what we were talking about in the beginning, everything is in theory, is in abstract, is like so lovely, but how do you bring it down and how do you actually begin to bring it into your day-to-day? So
yeah, absolutely. So I definitely will be checking out your website. Absolutely. Now, Cynthia, if we were to leave, our listeners with 3 pieces of advice regarding communication and languaging and talking either to others, to ourselves, what would those 3 pieces of advice would be?
Let's see. 3 pieces of advice. Okay.
We've covered quite a bit. I mean, you've given us.
We have. So number 1, I would say, is to really be gentle with yourself.
Okay.
So when you start to notice that you're not connecting with yourself in a kind, honest, and helpful way, and you notice that you're maybe judging yourself for it, right? Instead of trying to flip things to the positive, just come out and be like, hey, we're good. Like, I'm just going to wrap my arms around you, give you a big hug. Let's just, do this together.
I love that.
So just be gentle with yourself. That's number 1. Number 2 is when something happens in the moment, that you become aware in the moment that either you've said something that is hurtful or that you are not in a space where you can be kind and helpful. Own it. Just say, I am so sorry that didn't come out right. I just said something really hurtful. I want to try this again. Or I'm feeling really frustrated right now and very overwhelmed right now. So I'm just going to take a minute, right?
Yeah.
Just declare it in the moment.
Yeah.
And then the third piece of advice would be that anytime you notice yourself trying to convince someone of something or trying to fix something for someone, that if in that moment when you notice it, you can say, what would this moment look like if I wasn't trying to force or push? And if I could just allow this person to like be in their discomfort, could I allow this person to just experience whatever it is that they're experiencing without trying to convince them to feel different or be different?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. So actually powerful in terms of always being of service, like from a real estate perspective to both our sellers and our buyers. What you just said, your last point, absolutely. Cynthia, it's been an amazing time together. I feel like I could talk to you for hours. Thank you so much for being on Inflow, and for you listening. Thank you so much for tuning in. I love coming into your space, spending time with you guys, and I am excited to be with you in the next episode of Inflow. So until the next time, thank you so much, Cynthia.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I hope this episode left you feeling inspired and ready to get inflows of cash, inflows of light, and inflows of faith in your life. I welcome your reviews on iTunes. Please leave me a review and help me create an amazing community of women in flow. Thank you, as always, for sharing your voice by going to michellebosch.com and joining the conversation about this show. And while you're there, grab a copy of my 10 Commandments to Living a Life in Flow. You can also follow me on Facebook at Michelle Bosch and on Instagram at Michelle Bosch Official. Thank you very much, and until the next one.